President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced tonight that the country will come out of the National State of Disaster Declaration as of midnight. Over the next 30 days, though, there will be some regulations that remain in place, including the requirement for people attending large gatherings to produce either a negative COVID-19 test not older than 72 hours or indeed proof of vaccination. Now, if you're gathering indoors, only up to 1,000 people will be allowed to do so without that requirement. People gathering outdoors, 2,000, that is the cap in settings where people will not be required to either prove that they've been tested for COVID-19 within a 72-hour window or indeed that they are vaccinated, according to the president. If you exceed those numbers, then you will have to comply. Let's get you the reaction from the country's official opposition. Spokesperson Siviwe Gwarube from the DA joins us now. We also have Pastor Derek Muswana and the National Football Supporters Association's Siyabulela Loilane. Let's start with you, Siviwe, as the official opposition. You've been calling for the state of disaster to be scrapped. Does the president have your support at this point?
Yeah, Thembekile, good evening, and good evening to your viewers. Of course, we have been calling for the scrapping of the state of disaster, primarily because we've understood, as your previous guest on the show indicated, that we have been deeply concerned about the impact that the state of disaster has had on the economy, particularly and more, I suppose, more simply on the bottom line of jobs and people being able to retain their jobs. And if you look at the job stats that came out on the fourth quarter labor survey last week, you realize that we are shedding jobs at an alarming rate. And the 30 million South Africans who are already living in poverty will only increase if we still have some of these kind of stringent measures, which are in effect killing jobs. It was also interesting to note that the MAC, the Ministerial Advisory Committee, had said to government that in fact it is high time that we move away from the containment measures of COVID-19 and move towards mitigation of this pandemic, considering that it is here to stay. And so we cautiously welcome the lifting of the state of disaster. We think it is a step in the right direction and it is the right move to make, particularly considering where we are as a country. We, however, are cautious.
Just on that point you were making about caution, what is fair caution as far as the DA is concerned? Because as you say, COVID is going nowhere. Not everyone is vaccinated. We don't know if everyone in this country has enough immunity to be able to survive the worst of a COVID infection.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the caution I was referring to, Thembekile, is definitely along some of the provisions we have seen contained in the draft health regulations, which are still out for public comment. We are concerned that there might be a move to replicate some of the regulations we saw under the Disaster Management Act and under the state of disaster in those regulations, primarily along the unvetted powers that a health minister would have in terms of clamping down on some movements which we had been really opposing to. And of course, Thembekile, as the president said tonight, that we're not out of the woods, and no one is in the world. But considering where we are as a country and considering the fact that expert advice is telling us that there's absolutely no way that we can, 2 years after this pandemic or after this pandemic has started, be talking about containment. We now have to move towards a resilient South Africa where we've got measures in place that will help the most vulnerable remain safe. We've continued making sure we bolster the health response in terms of the health system, but we open up the country as much as possible.